I do want to introduce our distinguished panel. It's an amazing group of folks that have shown up to participate today. Starting closest to me is Dr. Stuart Genn. Dr. Genn is an ENT surgeon at WakeMed Hospital and Healthcare, or WakeMed Health and Hospitals in Raleigh, just down the road. He leads system-wide innovation efforts there as the medical director of WakeMed Innovations. So Stuart and WakeMed Hospital were the first entity in the United States to fly a routine autonomous drone mission, and they've been doing so for almost 3 years now, very long time. Very innovative individual, Dr. Genn. He's also a former flight instructor, an airline pilot, and he just recently founded the Coalition for Advanced Health Mobility, and we call Stuart the underachiever of the organization. We'll see maybe one of these days if it'd make his parents proud. On the very far end is Dr. Katie Salamati, a absolute bona fide transportation subject matter expert at the SAS Institute. She's responsible for providing solutions to help transportation agencies make better and well-informed decisions involving safety and mobility challenges. And she's seen around the country certainly as a bona fide transportation expert with SAS. Next to Dr. Genn is Brent Sloan. Brent is the Director of Geospatial Solutions at LifeScale Analytics. He is a very highly regarded progressive leader with more than 20 years of experience in the geospatial industry, and his organization, LifeScale Analytics, is definitely out there on the edge of helping communities really understand how to take advantage of geospatial technology and the analytics behind that. And second from the end, Frank Mundy, my friend for a long time, Senior Vice President of Operations at Stewart Engineering here in Raleigh. So Frank has this new job title of Senior Vice President, and I don't think he knows exactly what he's responsible for yet. So it's a lot of things at Stewart Engineering, so he's a big cheese there. We'll just leave it at that. And as Tom said, I'm the Executive Director of the Advanced Mobility Collective, and what we're really doing is part of the Wireless Research Center, the Riot family. We're the same 501c3 corporation. Our job is to really look at complex mobility opportunities like wildland firefighting, like healthcare logistics, like disaster response after flooding, those sorts of things, and really interconnect the incredibly complex systems required to actually create systems that can be sustainable and scale and be economically viable for the people that are participating in that. So we have lots of different kinds of projects around the country going on, and one of which I'll just touch on real quickly is a wildland firefighting initiative called the Forest Tech Center with the state of Colorado, and we're moving into the wine industry in California, so leveraging mobility and the underlying systems to be able to mitigate and manage wildfires. So something that's less important on the East Coast, but something that just maybe give you a little idea of the kinds of things that we're involved in. And I'm really glad that this event changed from smart cities to connected communities because mobility and all these things aren't about just cities. It is a rural-urban opportunity and a rural-urban challenge. And it's also about connecting. It is about the underlying systems, and a big part of this conversation today is going to be around the elements underneath mobility that really make it work and come alive. And at the base of that is broadband. It's a broadband access, broadband infrastructure, the communication systems that lie on top of that. We heard from AirPaw, we heard from other organizations that are, and our friend from the city of Cary, thinking about how all these things have to be interconnected, and the basic things need to be in place for that to work. And there's also digital infrastructure. The data has to be exchanged between all these systems for them to be really valuable. So we want to talk about what the heck advanced mobility is today. We want to provide a perspective that lets you all start thinking about the system of systems thinking, and we want to maybe highlight what can be achieved, what the possibilities are, and we wanted to talk about equitability and sustainability, and then that must be baked in. So I'm going to kick it off with Dr. Genn. I'm going to ask you this question first. So he did not, very specifically, didn't even want to know what I was going to ask him. He has no idea what's coming right now. So
I deny it.
What's 116 times pi? No.
Delicious.
As a medical innovation leader at WakeMed Hospital and Healthcare, you may have more experience than just about anybody else in the country with routine drone delivery. And new mobility, especially advanced air mobility, are not just transportation. So how do you view these things of advanced mobility through a broader lens? What do you think about when you're thinking about that?
Yeah. Okay, thanks for the question, and thanks for having us. I do think that's a really interesting question. We have, at WakeMed, and I personally have changed, my answer to that question would have been different 5 years ago, I think. Mostly because I was looking at things through the lens of transportation and aviation, aerospace, and a pilot. I mean, a drone is a flying device. From one standpoint, it's a little aircraft. As we started the process at WakeMed, we use drones to connect two relatively close facilities to deliver blood samples back and forth for routine patient care. We don't do it for emergencies, we do it for routine care. And it's a pilot program. We intended, and we still intend, that's a long story, as the regulatory environment shifts and opens up, to connect all of our facilities, to connect our 3 hospitals, to basically build a network. We use these drones like we use pneumatic tubes inside of our hospital system. I mean, if you know what a pneumatic tube system is, like the old-fashioned drive-through tellers, they're ubiquitous inside the walls and ceilings of hospitals, and it's how we ship small packages around our buildings. It really resonated inside among my leaders at WakeMed when we started talking about the drone system, not as a piece of transportation infrastructure, but as a piece of the building, as an extension of the building. So really that evolved to the point where we really do, as we think about what we want to do with the technology and what its implications are for our system and what services we can provide and where, we think of it as a piece of our building. We think of it as infrastructure. And I really think that kind of captures the transition we've made, simplistically moving away from thinking of these vehicles as a piece of transportation technology and more towards a piece of sort of prop tech or building technology.
Wow, thank you, Stuart. Frank, I was going to ask you to kind of follow up on that, and we just talked about the breadth of this ecosystem. It's pretty far and wide. There's some really important pieces that you're involved with, and that is how important is the physical infrastructure to what Stuart's talking about, the other kind of the softer things around physical infrastructure as well?
Absolutely. Once again, thanks for having us. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I mean, I think that's, a lot of folks have asked us, what is a civil engineering, structural engineering firm doing in this space? Well, we see this as from a truly physical infrastructure standpoint, and to piggyback on what Dr. Gins said, is we look at this, and the early adopters of this type of information and this type of more simplistic looking at it just as an example, from the building side, this becomes a piece of our building, is the early adopters are going to be how do we adapt existing physical infrastructure to make this a viable opportunity. Earlier this year, I'm sure most of you know in here, the city of Atlantic City, New Jersey, won a grant with the FAA and NASA, their Jitney program, which is the kind of hop-on, hop-off bus system to tour the city to hit all the casinos in town. They partnered with NASA and FAA, and they now have an aerial vehicle drop-off to all the casinos. Why does that work? Because those casinos have helipads on the roof. So they're readapting that, and very similar to what you're talking about, that's using in that thought process to use some of that existing infrastructure to bring online. But it's important, very important, that all of these systems have to come online together, and we can't get one in front of the other for sure.
We brought those 2 points up early, like the things that are flying in very traditional physical infrastructure. Both have to be elevated at the same time. So Brent, beyond this physical infrastructure, what is the role that geospatial data and tools has on the social, economic, and institutional infrastructure in our communities?
Thanks, Todd, and thanks everyone for having us. Super excited to be here and talk about this. Frank was talking about the physical infrastructure and the integration of a lot of different systems. So as Todd mentioned, my background's in geospatial, so I'm definitely going to have that slant. I'm very biased towards geospatial solutions, and what it means to smart communities, what it means to advanced mobility. I do believe it is a core competency in all of this, right? Being able to have a system that enables geospatial technology is a big part of this. If we think about the social infrastructure, you think, most of you guys probably heard that Wake County just announced that they're going to build 3 new schools. So how do you go about doing that, right? I mean, you have to look at, what is the current education distribution, what schools are overpopulated, where can we physically build a school, where our infrastructure support that. So GIS really helps drive a lot of those decisions. You think about that same use case, from an urban planning perspective, from a transportation perspective. Do we have to slow down speed limits on roads? Do we need to put in a stop sign? So all these things are considerations. From the economic infrastructure perspective, you can use GIS data to look at things like, what is the GDP contribution going to look like? What is our market growth going to look like? How as a community can we support bringing in large industry, bringing in Apple, bringing in Toyota, Amazon, whoever else, right? It's important to be able to analyze these certain things. And then from an institutional infrastructure perspective, we think about, citizen advisories, civic inclusion, we think about law enforcement, right? So with GIS, if you're in an emergency, let's say your house catches on fire, you use your cell phone to call 911. They automatically know where you're calling from, where your address is, and where to dispatch, the fire department to come and save you. And so GIS is all underlying behind that because there's a space and time to all sort of data and information, and I certainly think that's important.
All right, thank you, Brent. Katie, I wanted to ask you this. So the SAS Institute is based here in Cary, North Carolina, obviously a longtime leader in data and analytics. From your perspective, what are the really key elements to consider when deploying advanced mobility solutions to connected communities? Perhaps for these tubes, these habit-trail tubes that Dr. Gann is referring to.
Well, thank you for having me. So I would say the first and most important element is to start with the outcome. What is the desired outcome that we want to get from any of these connected mobility or connected community projects? What is the ultimate objective? And as we know, technology is always a means to an end. But through a cooperative process, we can identify the right technology to help and support the outcome and the objective that we want. And also, so for example, the technology that we're going to use right now may not be as key in the next 5 years as the speed of the technology is evolving, or it may not even be recognizable in 10 years. So we have to allow space for new test technologies to come in, as Town of Cary is doing, as David was talking about their connected vehicle project. Allow for new technologies to be implemented, for the mistakes to happen, and for the lessons that we can learn from that. But throughout the whole process, there are also several key elements that we need to consider. One is the interoperability, as David mentioned, to make sure that the vendors are providing clean and compatible data that can be used in various different systems and can be consumed by this ecosystem of these connected projects. The second is the data format and the content harmonization of these data. And then the third is really the governance that needs to be implemented by the OEMs, by the vendors that cities and municipalities and even states and federal government work with. And also leadership in leading these such projects, as Town of Cary was showing with their connected vehicle projects. So these are really the key elements that would help with any of these new projects that are using newer technologies, but also need to all have a vision and have an objective in place.
Thank you, Katie. Anybody want to jump in? Please let me know. Just raise your hand and we'll turn it your way. So, Brent, I wanted to come back to you and ask you, the Riot organization, a lot of people here are very involved in IoT and sensor technology. We've heard from MITRE talking about weather and the sensor data that's being collected there. So how do you see the role of sensors, all this IoT data being collected, and how's it all going to play out? What does it look like down the road?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, I think that our technology is there. I mean, we're seeing more edge computation. We're seeing more sensors on the road. We see, you know, Chad Foley had presented earlier showing all the sensors that we have at intersections. You know, we're getting to a point of having dynamic data at our fingertips at all times, right? So, you know, thinking about things like parking spaces being opened. You know, if you're driving, you can have, you know, Google Maps tell you what spaces are open and where you can park. You know, I think that edge computation is going to be big as we expand into deep learning, machine learning, object detection models. You know, I think it's limitless. I think the technology is already there. It's just our only limitation is really with creativity and what we can think of.
Right. I know for me, thinking about weather, for example, I would love to see every person, every truck, every plane, every stoplight, every single asset in the country be a weather station that's sending weather information back. And I think ultimately the ability to gather that kind of data that fuels a model like what Mike Robinson was talking about for MITRE is what we will really need to be able to power this very detailed microclimate understanding. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. So, Kate, I wanted to ask you this as well. We'll follow up on that. So to talk about the data flow, right? We have, in the fields, we're going to have perhaps trillions of sensors at some point in time. We are going to have edge computing. We are going to have all of that data making its way to the cloud eventually, and analytics and machine learning and AI being applied to that. Kind of walk us through, what does that mesh of data moving around, spinning around space look like down the road?
Yes. So it definitely requires a platform, more of a unified platform that will enable not for the data to flow, but these different data formats, different technologies, different even coding languages, different interfaces, at rest versus you know, in-stream data, and open source, not open source, all of that. So there are several components to this. It's not only the unified platform, but also capability to be to integrate it with cloud. As you know, many organizations are moving as part of their digital transformation. They're moving their business and really critical operations into the cloud. So being able to connect to the cloud is another factor, another key elements or characteristics of this data flow, and a platform that can handle the data flow. And then also, you know, as Stuart mentioned, especially when it comes to connectivity, there is that real-time aspect or near real-time aspect that is part of that. And when it comes to real-time, there is a lot of data coming in. The speed of the data is different. It's coming in at a higher speed. And also there is a need in making a decision in real time and a need to make accurate decisions. So for example, with the Town of Cary Connected Vehicle, David, you went before us, so you're my frame of reference for this project. But as you know, different connected and different mobility application, it's the aspect of safety. When it comes to safety, it's important to be able to make accurate decisions and in real-time decisions. So that's part of it. That's a key component of this data flow and decisioning. And then also at stream, so the data is coming in real time. For reducing the latency is very important for the data, for the decisions to be made at the location of the data, at where the data is being generated, rather than collecting it, sending it via some sort of you know, API to a cloud or somewhere else for analysis. It's also important to reduce that latency and also reduce the cost, because collecting that data, transmitting the data, storing the data, it just increases the cost of any kind of mobility or connectivity project. So in order to reduce the latency and reduce the cost, it's important to make the decision at the location. That's where, you know, the edge processing comes in, the in-stream analytics comes in. And then another important aspect is that the decisions are made based on analytical models. It all comes down into forecasting, predictions, optimization, all these analytical models that would help us make a better decision for a safety application, to understand, for example, the time of contact between when the pedestrian arrives at the crosswalk or the vehicle passes through a crosswalk. So these models are being developed, but as the new data is coming in, as the results of the models are generated, there needs to be that feedback loop to feed back to the models, so then the models can auto-tune themselves, the models can update themselves. And that's where the whole concept of machine learning comes in. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is that how we can manage all these hundreds and thousands of models that are running in real time, are being fed data in real time, and need to make a decision in real time. So then that concept of model management is also very important in this whole data flow.
Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, just one important thing to add on there. Data standardization is huge. I think that as we think about smart communities, it's really important. I mean, we're bringing in thousands of different types of data, and so, you know, standardizing how that information is brought in, I think, is really important as we start to look across different communities as well.
Definitely, okay. So Stuart, you've worked in some of the most forward-thinking industries ever. Healthcare, airlines. Oh wait, no, nothing like that at all, actually. Right? But I wanted to ask you, I mean, healthcare seems really well positioned to take advantage of this, and they seem ready for disruption. But what does that really look like, and what's the timeline? What's the appetite? When are we going to see flying cars?
Ooh, so I don't know. So healthcare, yes, it's a mess. So there's meaning there's just, it's a complex, calling it a system, at least here, is, you know, you got to use a small s for the system. It's not, it's a lot of disparate organizations. People do things different ways. On the other hand, there's an effort underway, and it's deliberate and also sort of evolutionary towards consolidation that has upsides and downsides. It's resulted, for instance, in closures of rural hospitals. A lot of this is driven around healthcare finance. So there's just a ton of opportunity in healthcare to move the needle. And it's going to require lots of different strategies and technologies and a very innovative sort of stance moving forward. In terms of healthcare, I mean, I'm an apologist for advanced mobility technology in healthcare. And when I say advanced mobility, in this case, I'm speaking specifically of drones and then larger flying vehicles called eVTOLs, which are like flying cars. Nobody really thinks of them that way, but that's what. And these are vehicles that are being built, financed, and certified right now. They're going to be a lot quieter, safer, and they're going to be all electric for the most part. I've seen these eVTOLs fly in person. They are as quiet as a tractor trailer truck, or quieter even when in a low hover. And when you take them up, it's the same for drones. When they get 200 feet in the air, they're nearly silent. When we think through then the sort of the footprint of a healthcare system like mine, like WakeMed, which is a mid-sized level 1 trauma center safety net hospital system with 3 hospitals, but it's growing, and obviously we have a lot of population growth in this area. And then you think about other hospital systems like Vidant in the eastern part of the state, which serves a lot of rural communities and basically has networked in and subsidizes small rural hospitals that are critical to healthcare access to those citizens, but where they're geographically distributed and financially constrained. The services that are available at those kind of hospitals are basically decreasing, and that's just a fact. So if you had really fluid, bidirectional, the ability to move people, goods, expertise around healthcare systems very fluidly and at an acceptable cost and at a really high level of safety and a very low environmental and community impact in terms of things like noise and environmental impact, where I used the analogy before that drones are like pneumatic tubes, and I always try to think of the eVTOLs like elevators. So it's kind of like deconstructing a healthcare system and scattering it around or connecting them together. The need for that is right now, and the financial aspects of it and the bar you've got to cross to justify the cost of the new systems coming online is it lower or higher? It's more expensive, but the value you develop for the healthcare system is incredibly high by connecting patients and providers to more services. And I think that creates a serious opportunity for us in healthcare to embrace this technology. And I also think that there are dynamics around using the technology for healthcare use cases because of this. Essentially, you're developing social license. There's a public benefit in addition to a potential economic benefit. So I think that within 5 years, we're going to see serious progress on both fronts. Larger drone-based networks connecting healthcare systems and communities as sort of a piece of the healthcare infrastructure, and then eventually, maybe 5 to 10 years, the same for eVTOLs and moving people on larger cargo.
I like that.
I've been wrong before, though.
I've known Stuart for about 3.5 years, and every time I ask him this question, he says 5 years, so it just keeps moving back. No, I'm kidding.
I'm going to keep saying it.
So kind of grounding us back, Frank, those are big, lofty things, right? And Stuart's a big dreamer. He's also a big doer. But there's a lot of things to get resolved along the way. There's property rights, there's regulatory piece locally, there are noise barriers that we might see that we need to pass, thresholds we might set. We might have cities try to pass rules that create all kinds of different complications to being able to make that possible. And I talk about that a little bit, from landowner rights and responsibilities, from the hospital to cities. What's that look like? What's the landscape look like?
If I had the answer to that one, I think I would bottle it, and maybe I could finance some of what we've talked about so far. But it is a very tangled web, and it is something that, just like we talked about, it is a critical, that piece of the legal piece is the landowner rights. All that piece is a critical piece of infrastructure to bring this online, to bring this type of systems online. Apologize for maybe going down in the weeds a little bit, but who saw the Domino's commercial in the last 6 months with the Neuro pizza delivery that the Noid from back in the 80s or 90s is after? That is an unmanned ground vehicle, a UGV, very similar to what we could put into place at Wake Med. All right, if UPS has that, are they legally, can they drive that in the right of way? Can they bring that on your property as a private landowner? If it is, how does the site characteristics, if I'm a site designer, do they drive in the travel way? Do they have their own pathway? What's the interaction with pedestrians? What's the interactions with handicap or things of that nature on site? Do they stop at the door? If I live in an apartment complex and I order a pizza, I want it at my door. I don't want to go outside and down the street. So does that vehicle have the right to come and get on the elevator and come up? The technology's there, but when it runs over someone's toddler in the hallway, what happens? Right? So the technology is there, but we have to bring all that on. We talk about one of the things, this is back to some of the geospatial, some of the, around some of our sporting events, we have geofencing around sporting events to keep some of the drones out. I know our prison system right now has geofencing around those to keep people from flying drones in with contraband and dropping them into the facilities. So if I'm the private landowner and Katie is bringing in, she's getting DoorDash flown in every night by Jeff Causey and his crowd, all right, in Holly Springs, it's ain't but so long that drone's going to cross my backyard before something gets done. And maybe that's I lived in Granville County for a while, so maybe that's the Granville County coming out at me. But, okay, I say that jokingly, but the technology is going to come to where maybe I can put a geofence around my block, around my house and my lot that doesn't allow those types of things to come on. So all of that legal infrastructure has got to be built simultaneously to everything else.
Yeah, and I would say that it's got to be driven by sort of from the ground up.
Right.
It cannot be. This is a technology that these are technologies that operate in the public domain, right? So, and yet we can't build roads in the
Right.
same sense, and so the process is not there. So you've got to have sort of civic engagement, and it's got to be the communities that lead.
Right.
And they'll decide, can Amazon deliver here?
Right.
Or, is there enough benefit in our, and I think it's going to be probably community by community at first, right? So the question is, how do you mediate that? And how does it get sort of instantiated in law? But probably the same way it always has, like very slowly and
After the fact.
and trial and error, But
Well, while we're here, so Frank regularly entertains the groups that he's speaking to about his analogy with the Jetsons. Who here remembers the Jetsons cartoon? All right, so that was set in what year, Frank?
That was in 1962, the Jetsons.
They projected it to 2060?
2062, that was what life was supposed to be like in 2062, was the Jetsons.
So, tell us.
Yes.
How we doing?
I would encourage you, after we finish, really keeping you on the edge of your seat with this, to Google a Jetsons meme about life. And today, in a few weeks, it'll be 2022. We're 60 years into that Jetsons 100. And you'll see that George worked at this desk that had a computer screen that his boss was on. You'll see that Judy, the daughter, is taking doing a workout class to a screen. And you'll see that Elroy is going to school on a screen. Stop me if y'all haven't heard this now before. And then Rosie is the maid, and that's the vacuum. And I have a Roomba. Who in here has a Roomba? And ours is named Rosie. I'm just saying. So if you don't think it's happening, there's the Jetsons.
I think we're almost there. And we almost have flying cars. All right. So I wanted to ask Brent this question. So, Brent, Tom did a really good job talking about this fourth generation, I think is what he mentioned it being called. And we had the internet, we had the Industrial Revolution, we had the moonshot. I mean, to Tom's point, and my question to you is just how damn big is this? How epic is it? How transformational is what we're talking about going to be?
That's certainly a big question to answer, but I think it's apparent that we're on the brink of a large technological revolution. I think we're already starting to shift the way we live, we work, we interact with one another, and I don't think it's clear exactly how it's going to unfold in terms of whether it's this fifth industrial revolution or how it's going to come about. But I think one thing that is very clear is it's how we respond to it. I think that we need to be very integrated. We need to be comprehensive about how we do it, and I think it involves everyone. I think we need to involve private and public sector, civic inclusion, academia. I think it's really important that we're all involved in this, and I think it starts with smart communities. I mean, I think it's a really good way to start, building up this infrastructure and really looking at the problem. But it is big. I mean, it's I think 2062 for the Jetsons and what they're projecting. I mean, we're already we're pretty damn close already. Right? I mean,
Maybe this got the 6 and the 2 reversed. Kate, I'm not even sure how to ask you this question. We talked about it in the hallway a little bit earlier today, but you're a transportation expert and work for an organization that's involved in a lot of different things certainly well beyond transportation. But this isn't just transportation. It's a transformation of how we kind of live, work, and play. And I just wanted you to kind of expand upon that. What does that really mean? For transportation people that are thinking like, we always complain that aviation people always think about aviation, about drones. This is an aviation problem. Well, it's really not. And it's also not really a transportation problem. Like the transportation people come at it as a transportation thing. It's not an aviation thing. It's a technology thing. What is it? How should we really think about it?
So, I can say when it comes to transportation, it's a mobility thing, maybe. Maybe that would encompass everything. But also, as part of the mobility, there are other things that are important to this mobility. The most important thing is safety. And so if you're moving anything from one place to another, it just needs to deliver or be there, get there safely in one piece. And just one thing about that, because I'm coming from the ITS Americas Conference in Charlotte, Intelligent Transportation Systems, and the chairwoman for National Transportation Safety Board was giving a report, was giving us statistics on how safety was impacted the past 2 years with COVID restrictions. Even though the VMT is down, the vehicle mile travel is down throughout the whole country, we are seeing on average between 5% to 15% increase in vehicle crashes and accidents and fatalities generally. And there is something that they really wanted to investigate further. People are traveling less, they're driving less, but we are seeing more crashes. So for example, North Carolina, the past 2 years, we've had 12% increase in crashes. Just because of higher speeds, people not paying attention. So safety is a critical part of mobility. Almost all the states have adopted this concept of Vision Zero, towards zero fatalities. And we believe that we can achieve that. At least during the past 10 years, 7 of those 10 years, we had 0 aviation fatalities. So if aviation fatality is achievable during the past, 7 of those 10 years, we can definitely implement strategies and technologies that would help us with achieving Vision Zero in traffic fatalities and surface transportation accidents generally. But safety is the main piece of that. Second is reliability. Especially this comes to transporting goods. Reliability is an important thing. You want to make sure it gets there. If it's going to take 10 hours versus 5 hours, you just want to make sure that it's going to be 10 hours. You don't want it to plan for 10 hours and then it will get there in 5 hours. For the trucks, for example, that they have to wait, be idle, or plan for 10-hour travel and then your goods or your freight will get there in 15 hours. So reliability, consistency throughout the whole transportation and mobility is a big thing. And then I would say equity is another thing that is now really big, is becoming very big in transportation. So then everybody can access transportation, is accessible to everyone, accessible to vulnerable road users, accessible to pedestrians, to bicycles, to people with disabilities, to underserved areas. So equity is also an important part of that.
Yeah, Brent, I know we don't have a conversation without you talking about equitability, fairness, opportunity for everyone, but also it's a rural-urban challenge as well, right? Mobility is going to wind up being, if it's going to be equitable, it's going to have to be considered of rural and urban areas. And that's part of why I'm so grateful that this conference was changed to Connected Communities from Smart Cities. And tell us, I know you're very passionate about this subject. Tell us your thoughts on equitability and what does it really mean? What's it need to be and how important is it to the system? Brent.
Yeah, it is something that we need to keep in consideration. I think that as the technology grows, we're looking at, smart communities. I think, these rural areas where there is no broadband, it's still going to be an issue. I think that we can advance in larger urban areas a lot faster. I think as things like advanced mobility come about, I think there is still going to be this inequitable distribution in some of these smaller areas, and not just here in the U.S., but thinking, in different countries, third world locations. I think it's a big problem, and we need to come up with solutions for how we handle it. So.
Stuart, you are a big thinker around infrastructure, rural, urban, missions that are urban and rural related, and a lot of conversation takes place about vertical integration of a company like Joby, for example, who's trying to own the entire stack of the infrastructure, the data exchange, and so on. We had worries early on that Uber might be thinking the same thing. But how important is shared infrastructure in rural and urban areas to the whole operation, to making it equitable and cost-effective for other entrants?
Yeah, so I think that is a big topic of conversation. When you work in healthcare, it's always kind of a part of the conversation. It's kind of baked in. We think about it as accessibility. Like any system we develop in healthcare, these layers of infrastructure are going to be only valuable to users, and we're only going to be able to deliver value to our patients, customers, whatever you want to call everybody, if they're accessible in sort of that immediate sense. But even for the industry, I think the thing that characterizes this technology and why it might be really big is because it's potentially kind of democratizing access to forms of transportation. I know I just said that it wasn't transportation. And mobility that are previously have been locked out, too expensive, too complex. If you can, I mean, historically, when you take pieces of, when you create systems that are much more widely accessible and distributed, and you put them in the hands of users and customers, and they become accessible in that sense, that's when major industrial shifts occur. And to me, that's kind of the key element here. It's true in healthcare for this technology, but I think that's just sort of a microcosmic example of the concept that might be in play. And so I think the industry itself stands to benefit if it's developing open systems. That's always the way industries work, is there's a natural tension between everybody wants to integrate vertically and own the entire value chain versus an open system which has more competition and potentially more risk, but the market is enormous. So I think that'll play out however it plays out, but over time it tends to be the case that systems that are open become more valuable, I think.
Great, thank you. Frank, I want to ask you this question. You know, you're this big epic thinker, and you're this very fair guy.
You got big correct.
Yeah, that's true. And so tell us ways that, you know, Stuart talked about it needs to be tied together, it needs to bring us together. What's the promise of advanced mobility to tie us together, to bring us together? The rural-urban challenge, the have-not, the make it equitable for all. How actually, in your mind, will it all be tied together to bring us together?
I think it's interesting you said that, and just a few minutes ago I was reminded, actually earlier this week I was at another conference, the Urban Land Institute's Carolina Capitals Conference, which is a group of individuals who the context of that meeting was basically growth in very different market sectors throughout the Carolinas and kind of economic forecast accordingly in the real estate market world. And, you know, on that front, we are sitting on a gold mine. I mean, I think that goes without saying with everyone that wants to come here and set up business. But when you start looking at demographics of where we are positioned, where we are very fortunate enough to live, and what's being called the Great Migration to the Carolinas, to the Southeast, that cannot be understated to how, and I hate to say supply and demand, but how we can use that to merge all these technologies, and we are positioned as a community. It's right here for the taking. It's coming to us. We don't have to go out there and get it. It's coming to us. I mean, just things as simple as building the entire hierarchy of surface transportation. You know, with the ports we have in Wilmington, Charleston, Savannah, connected to the ports in Mobile and in Houston, those alone are acting as a major conduit to growth in our part of the world. And as the rail market connects, we don't connect east and west anymore. We connect north and south. And that connects to the natural resources of Canada, but it all connects to the Southeast United States, which is going to drive all the things to allow us to do the things that we've talked about, the inequities rule, because of that technology has got to come here to do that.
Thank you. We're out of time, but I really wanted to thank the city of Raleigh and Noah Otto and Riot and my good friend Tom Snyder and Mayor Baldwin and everybody else involved in this conference. It's been an absolute honor, but also I want to thank Dr. Katie Salamati, Frank Mundy, Brent Sloan, Dr. Stuart Ginn. Thank you all very much, and we'd love to keep in touch.